Sometimes the worst moments of our lives are just the universe preparing us for who we're meant to become. In the unforgiving heartland, where fortunes are forged in sweat and destroyed by the venomous grip of greed, a new legend was about to be meticulously etched into the very soil. It was a tale whispered by the wind through parched fields, a truth born from the crucible of injustice, destined to shatter the illusion of power held by those who forgot their roots. The banker thought he was slapping a nobody. What he truly struck was his own meticulously orchestrated end. Richard Hale's hand arced through the sterile, hushed air of the Rowan Agricultural Bank, a precise, brutal slap that detonated like a gunshot in the marble-clad lobby. Time seemed to splinter, its fragments suspended in an agonizing slow-motion crawl. The sharp, visceral crack of flesh on flesh, the immediate searing sting spreading across Caleb Rowan's cheek, the sudden, stunned silence from the scattered patrons, all of it felt distant, observed through a thick, distorting pane of glass. Caleb's head snapped sideways, his worn, wide-brimmed hat tumbling from his grasp to spin silently, almost gracefully on the polished floor, a lone compass losing its bearing. For a fleeting, disorienting moment, the world tilted, threatening to capsize into an abyss of despair. But then, with an almost defiant strength, it steadied. His gaze, once downcast in humble observation, rose, slow and deliberate, imbued with a calm that defied the fresh violence. Controlled. His eyes, the color of rich, dark earth after a spring rain, met Hale's, unwavering, holding a depth of purpose and a nascent fury the arrogant banker could never, in his shallow, gilded world, fathom. An hour earlier, the promise of a Tuesday morning had been as clear and boundless as the prairie sky. The crisp air, tinged with the scent of distant alfalfa and honest toil, had still held the lingering coolness of dawn. Caleb Rowan, a man whose hands bore the indelible marks of honest labor and whose spirit was steeped in the rhythm of the land, had walked into the main branch of Rowan Agricultural Bank. It was an institution that bore his family's name, yet it felt as alien as a lunar landscape. The dust of his fields still clung to his worn denim, a fine, almost sacred powder, and rich, dark mud, a testament to the recent spring rains, was caked onto his sturdy boots. Each step he took on the immaculate, gleaming marble floors of the bank felt like a trespass, a quiet defiance. The building itself was a stark, almost violent contrast to the world he inhabited. Marble floors, polished to a mirror sheen, gleamed under the harsh, unblinking glare of recessed lighting, reflecting the imposing, glass-walled offices of senior executives like a gallery of polished predators. The air, conditioned to a perpetually cool, dry temperature, carried the faint, metallic scent of new money and stale ambition, a suffocating perfume that choked out the earthy tang of turning soil or the sweet, honest perfume of alfalfa. Suits, starched and impeccable, glided past, their wearers too preoccupied with their own polished reflections or the digital glowing screens in their hands to spare more than a fleeting, dismissive glance for the young man who seemed to have wandered in from a forgotten era. Or perhaps, Caleb thought, they spared a glance precisely because of it, because his very presence, a raw, unfiltered slice of the world outside, was an affront to their curated, artificial existence. Security guards, their uniforms crisply pressed, their eyes cold and assessing, watched him with thinly veiled disgust, as if he were a stray dog that had somehow slipped through the automatic doors, tracking the inconvenient truth of the outside world onto their pristine surfaces. He wasn't just out of place. He was an embodiment of the inconvenient truths they desperately tried to ignore. He was a threat, not with a weapon, but with his authenticity. He approached the polished granite counter, the low, mechanical hum of the bank's operations a deceptive lull around him, a false serenity masking the machinery of exploitation. The young woman behind the teller window, her hair pulled back in a severe, almost painful bun, her expression perfectly composed and utterly devoid of warmth, looked up. Her practiced, polite smile evaporated the moment her eyes registered his appearance, the faded denim, the calloused hands, the untamed spirit in his gaze. Caleb offered a polite, quiet smile in return, the kind born of long days spent in solitude with the vast, demanding land, a smile that conveyed patience and an understated strength, a strength they would never recognize. "Good morning," he said, his voice a low rumble, roughened by the dry winds of the fields and the countless sunrises he had greeted beneath an open sky. "I need to review some agricultural accounts." The request hung in the air, a foreign body in the sanitized space, an unwelcome truth in a kingdom of lies. A snicker, sharp and conspiratorial, rippled from behind the counter, quickly stifled, but not before its venomous echo reached Caleb's keenly attuned ears. The teller's perfectly manicured fingers, adorned with a delicate silver ring that seemed to mock his rugged hands, paused over her keyboard. Her perfectly shaped brows arched in disbelief, a silent question loaded with contempt. "Review accounts," she repeated, the words dripping with thinly veiled condescension, each syllable a tiny barb. "Sir, do you have an appointment? Are you a client?" Her gaze swept over his calloused hands, lingering on his faded work shirt, then descending to the stubborn remnants of mud on his boots. She didn't need to articulate her disdain. Her eyes, cold and dismissive, screamed the unspoken accusation. "You don't belong here. You are nothing." A few clients in the waiting area, mostly well-dressed older couples discussing their meticulously planned retirement portfolios, glanced over, their curiosity quickly giving way to polite aversion. They averted their eyes, dismissing him as effortlessly as they might dismiss a bothersome fly, their silent judgment echoing the teller's. He heard a whisper, sharp and cutting, from a woman with too much jewelry, her voice a brittle shard of ice. Another broke farmer, probably looking for a handout, a drain on the system. The words, though not directed at him, stung with the bitter taste of truth and prejudice, but Caleb kept his expression neutral, his inner resolve hardening. He was used to being underestimated, used to the quiet, pervasive judgment that came with his chosen life, a life connected to the unpredictable rhythms of the earth rather than the predictable cycles of the market. But this wasn't about him, not truly, not this time. He had come to the bank after a series of anonymous complaints landed, not on a sterile executive desk, but on his old, scarred oak farm table. They were letters, written in shaky, desperate hands by farmers, good people he had known since childhood, people whose families his grandfather had lent a helping hand to during lean years. Their pleas painted a grim picture. Loans rejected without explanation, interest rates that clawed at their livelihoods like predatory beasts, foreclosures looming like vultures on the horizon, ready to descend and pick apart their family legacies. Caleb had understood profoundly the true purpose of Rowan Agricultural Bank. His great-grandfather, a man whose vision was as wide as the prairie itself, had not just envisioned a financial institution, but a pillar of support for the entire rural community, a bank run by farmers, for farmers, built on the bedrock of trust and mutual aid. To hear that it had become something else entirely, something predatory, a voracious machine chewing up the very land it was meant to nourish, had gnawed at him, settling a cold, hard knot of dread deep in his bones. He knew, with a certainty that transcended mere intuition, that there are truths that only reveal themselves when everything we know falls apart. And the world he knew, the world his family had helped build, was indeed falling apart, brick by agonizing brick. The teller, having clearly decided he was not worth her precious time or attention, waved a dismissive hand, her fingers twitching with impatience. "You need to speak to a loan officer then, and you need an appointment. We don't just review accounts for walk-ins." She emphasized walk-ins with an almost theatrical disdain, as if he had tracked not just mud, but a fundamental societal failing onto her personal, pristine rug. Caleb didn't argue. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement that belied the simmering storm within. He found an empty, uncomfortable plastic chair in the waiting area, its sleek, minimalist design ill-suited for the weary, hard-working frame of a man who labored with his hands. He settled in, his posture relaxed despite the indignity, his eyes scanning, observing, taking in every detail of the sterile, hostile environment. He was a predator in waiting, blending into the landscape, learning his prey. Signs of rot were everywhere, not just in the frosty reception he had endured. He watched the continuous procession of farmers, many of whom Caleb recognized from county fairs and livestock auctions, faces etched with worry lines as deep as irrigation furrows, their shoulders slumped under invisible burdens. They were being rushed through consultations, emerging from the glass-walled offices often shaking their heads, their defeat palpable. Loan rejections, he noted with a grim sense of confirmation, were swift, brutal, and seemingly without explanation, delivered with the cold efficiency of an executioner. He watched one older gentleman, his overalls as worn and faded as Caleb's own, stumble out, tears glinting in his rheumy eyes, clutching a denial letter like a death sentence, his dreams crumbling to dust. The sight twisted a new, sharper knife in Caleb's gut. This was personal. This was family. Behind the frosted glass of the executive offices, the arrogant, hollow laughter of bankers echoed, sharp and cutting, easily slicing through the manufactured quiet of the lobby. It was the sound of hyenas feasting. He caught snippets of conversation, voices raised in dismissive tones, dripping with contempt. "Another one bites the dust," he heard a young man in a perfectly tailored suit sneer to a colleague, his voice smug, devoid of empathy. "These dirt people think land means power, but it's just collateral. Easy pickings." The words, delivered with chilling indifference, made something cold and hard settle in Caleb's chest, turning his simmering anger into a resolute, unyielding steel. The moral tension in the air was palpable, thick and suffocating, like a coming dust storm, an invisible pressure before a devastating environmental event. This wasn't the bank he had founded. This wasn't the legacy he had painstakingly built, brick by silent brick, cultivating a relationship of trust as carefully as a farmer nurtures a tender crop. This was a parasite, fattening itself on the very community it was supposed to serve, a malignancy devouring the heart of the heartland. He sat for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 40 minutes, a silent sentinel in a foreign land, observing the mechanisms of its downfall. His patience was legendary on the farm, honed by waiting for crops to grow, for rain to fall from reluctant skies, for livestock to calve. Here, in this temple of finance, it was perceived as either ignorance or desperation, a sign of weakness to be exploited. He watched the faces, the subtle tells of fear and resignation etched into the lines around their eyes. He watched the bankers, their faces alight with a sterile, predatory ambition, their movements precise, calculated. He noted the constant, almost imperceptible shuffling of papers, the endless forms designed to confuse, the jargon-laden conversations that seemed intended to intimidate rather than assist. This entire operation, he realized, was a carefully constructed facade, obscuring a core of deep-seated corruption, a rot that went all the way to the roots. It was a labyrinth designed to trap the unwary and the desperate, a legal snare crafted by wolves in designer suits. Amidst the cold indifference, a small, unexpected act of humanity cut through the chill like a fragile ray of sunlight. A young intern, no older than 20, his name tag identifying him as Evan, approached Caleb cautiously. He was slight, his movements hesitant, clearly intimidated by the polished aggression of his colleagues, a lamb among the wolves. In his hand, he held a plastic cup of water, beads of condensation clinging to its sides like dew on a spider web. "Sir," Evan's voice was soft, almost a whisper laced with genuine, unfeigned concern. "You've been waiting a while. Would you like some water?" Caleb looked up, a faint surprise flickering in his eyes, a brief crack in his controlled facade. He hadn't expected kindness here, not in this cold, sterile machine. He took the cup, his calloused fingers brushing Evan's cool, smooth ones, a fleeting connection between two different worlds. "Thank you, son," Caleb said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of his experience, the gravitas of a man who had seen much. Evan hesitated, glancing around nervously, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and conviction, before leaning in conspiratorially, his voice barely audible. "They don't treat farmers right here," he whispered, the truth bubbling up, raw and unrehearsed. "Not like they should. My grandpa used to say, a bank that forgets the land will soon forget its purpose. This bank, it feels like it's forgotten everything." Caleb's gaze softened. He nodded slowly, a silent acknowledgement that transcended their obvious differences, a shared understanding that ran deeper than words. This young man, this quiet intern, was the unexpected ally, a Leo equivalent, the moral anchor in a churning sea of greed. He represented the dwindling few who still understood the true value of the land, the real, foundational purpose of the bank. Caleb felt a flicker of hope, small but persistent, like a stubborn seedling pushing through hardened, unyielding earth, a tiny beacon in the encroaching darkness. He watched Evan retreat, a ripple of quiet rebellion in his slight frame, and knew that the rot hadn't consumed everything. Not yet. There was still a heartbeat beneath the cold marble. He finished the water, the cool liquid a small comfort against the dry heat building in his chest, a testament to his rising anger and resolve. He knew he couldn't wait any longer. The anonymous complaints, the whispered fears, the visible despair of the farmers, coupled with the blatant arrogance and dismissiveness of the staff, demanded a confrontation. The moment for passive observation was over. He stood, his movements slow and deliberate, a man of the earth rising to face a concrete jungle, and approached the lone officer's desk, the one whose laughter had been the loudest, whose sneering words had cut the deepest. The lone officer, a man named Mr. Peterson, was a stout individual with a gleaming, almost menacingly bald head and a perpetually sneering smile, a physical embodiment of the bank's callous indifference. He was in the middle of dismissing an elderly farm couple, his words clipped and unforgiving, each one a death knell to their hopes. Their faces, already pale and defeated, seemed to wither further as Peterson waved them away. As they shuffled away, their shoulders slumped, their dreams shattered. Caleb stepped forward, his shadow falling over Peterson's desk. "Excuse me, Mr. Peterson," Caleb said, his voice still quiet but now imbued with an undeniable, steely firmness. "I have a question about the Miller loan. Why was it rejected?" Peterson looked up, his sneer widening into an outright smirk, his eyes glinting with annoyance at the interruption. "And who might you be, friend?" "Another one of Mrs. Miller's family members, I suppose." "Look, pal, it's none of your business. The Millers don't qualify. End of story." He gestured dismissively with a hand weighted with a large, flashy signet ring, a gaudy symbol of his perceived authority. Caleb didn't flinch. His gaze remained unwavering, holding Peterson's with an intensity that made the lone officer's smirk waver slightly. "I'm asking as someone concerned about the bank's practices," he stated, his voice a low, steady current. "The Millers have been farming that land for 3 generations. They've never missed a payment until this last crippling drought. And suddenly, they don't qualify. Their land is generations deep in yield, their integrity unblemished for decades." Peterson's smirk vanished entirely, replaced by a flicker of genuine annoyance, a vein beginning to pulse faintly in his temple. Before he could respond, a thunderous voice, thick with self-importance and indignation, boomed from one of the glass offices. Richard Hale, a man whose expensive suit seemed to chafe against his very skin, a thin veneer of civility over raw aggression, stormed out. His face was a mask of furious indignation, a crimson flush spreading across his jowls. His silver hair was slicked back, a greasy, artificial sheen, his jaw tight, his eyes like chips of glacial ice, cold and unforgiving. He was the embodiment of corporate power, a predator in pinstripes, his presence radiating an aura of entitled menace. "What in the blazes is going on out here, Peterson?" Hale snapped, his voice echoing, reverberating off the polished surfaces of the lobby. He caught sight of Caleb, still standing quietly by Peterson's desk, and his eyes narrowed, dissecting him with a single contemptuous sweep, as if Caleb were a specimen under a microscope. "You, still here? I thought I heard you making trouble earlier, polluting the air with your peasant complaints." Caleb remained calm, his hands at his sides, knuckles slightly whitened, a testament to the internal battle he waged to maintain his composure. "I'm here because I'm concerned about how this bank is treating its clients," he stated, his voice even despite the tremor of anger beneath it. "Specifically, the farmers it was founded to serve, the very backbone of this region." Hale laughed, a sharp, humorless bark that sliced through the air like a rusty blade, devoid of any genuine mirth. "Oh, I heard you out there playing farmer-philosopher. The audacity, look at you. Your clothes are an insult to this institution. Your boots track filth across our pristine floors. You smell like a barn, like earth, untamed and primitive. And you have the gall to question my asterisk practices, to question the vision of profit and growth that I have instilled here." He took a step closer, his eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and deep-seated contempt, his breath hot and stale. "You think you know anything about banking, you dirt-poor farm boy. You think because you muck around in fields all day, you understand finance, the intricate dance of markets, the delicate balance sheets that fuel progress." He gestured wildly at Caleb's worn denim, his muddy boots, his simple, honest presence, as if these were criminal offenses. "This bank was built for vision, for growth, for profit, for the future, not for sentimental attachment to mud and hay, not for your quaint, backward ways." His words were a torrent of arrogant dismissiveness, each one designed to cut, to belittle, to reduce Caleb to nothing. Caleb's voice dropped, quiet but resonant, carrying the weight of generations of purpose, of a legacy far older and more profound than Hale's fleeting empire. "This bank was built to serve people like me, Richard. Farmers. People who work the land, who feed this country, who nurture the very lifeblood of our economy. It was founded on the principle of partnership, on mutual respect, on community, not exploitation, not on the parasitic extraction of wealth from those who truly create it." His words, delivered without shouting, without fanfare, struck Hale with the force of a physical blow, precisely because of their understated truth. Hale's face purpled, his jowls quivering with barely suppressed rage. The quiet defiance, the stark, undeniable truth of Caleb's words seemed to strike a raw nerve, pushing him over an invisible edge, stripping away his carefully constructed facade of control. He saw not a man standing before him, but an affront, an animal, a symbol of everything he despised about the rural poor he considered beneath his contempt. His hand shot out, fueled by an impulsive, violent need to assert dominance, to silence the inconvenient truth, to physically crush the quiet strength that threatened his fragile reign. The slap cracked across Caleb's face, a loud, brutal sound that instantly drew every eye in the bank lobby, freezing every conversation, every movement. The world recoiled, a collective gasp of shock. The sting was immediate, a burning fire across Caleb's cheek, a brand of indignity. His head, still ringing from the impact, turned back slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving Hale's. He tasted blood, a metallic tang on his tongue, a bitter flavor that fueled a cold, quiet rage. The silence in the lobby was absolute, thick with shock and disbelief, a vacuum created by the sudden violence. Richard Hale stood panting slightly, his chest heaving, a look of triumph mixed with furious satisfaction plastered across his face, his hand still hovering in the air, a grotesque tableau of petty victory. He had done it. He had put this peasant, this relic, in his place. He had asserted his dominion. Security guards, their expressions grim and practiced, moved in swiftly, their movements almost automatic. Before Caleb could react or even fully comprehend the visceral shock of the assault, they grabbed his arms, yanking him backward away from Hale, their grip brutal and unyielding. He offered no resistance. His body felt heavy, numb, yet his mind was razor-sharp, processing every detail, every nuance of the humiliation, etching it into his memory. Customers stared, their faces a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity, their whispered murmurs a Greek chorus of judgment and fear. The old farm couple who had just been denied their loan watched with wide, tear-filled eyes, an unspoken understanding passing between them and Caleb, a shared wound. He saw Evan, the young intern, clutching a stack of files as if for dear life, his face white with shock, his eyes fixed on Caleb, a silent plea for justice in their depths, a recognition of something profoundly wrong. The security guards dragged him towards the exit, their grip unyielding, their faces impassive. He let them, his body a dead weight, a silent protest. Just before they pushed him through the heavy glass doors, he bent down, slow and deliberate, and picked up his worn hat from the polished marble floor. He settled it back on his head, a small, defiant gesture of composure amidst the chaos, a crown of quiet resilience. The cool, crisp air outside hit his face, a stark contrast to the stifling, tense atmosphere within the bank, a chilling kiss that promised a storm. He stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, the sounds of the city traffic a dull roar around him, the fading ache in his cheek a stark reminder, a brand that would not soon fade. He felt the cold fury simmering beneath his controlled exterior, a quiet storm brewing, gathering its immense, unassailable power. The humiliation was not an end. It was the genesis. He reached into the pocket of his worn jeans, his calloused fingers closing around his phone. It was an old model, not a flashy smartphone, but reliable, a tool of necessity, not vanity. He scrolled to a contact, a name he rarely had to use, a number reserved for emergencies, for moments when the foundational integrity of his world was threatened. His thumb hovered, then pressed call, the decision firm, irreversible. The receiver buzzed once, twice, then a calm, professional voice answered, devoid of emotion, yet radiating a quiet efficiency. "Rowan Holdings," the voice said, crisp and immediate, carrying the weight of untold wealth and influence. "It's Caleb," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, yet resonating with an undercurrent of steel. "I need you to convene an emergency board meeting for Rowan Agricultural Bank, first thing tomorrow morning. No exceptions. And tell legal to prepare termination papers for a senior banker named Richard Hale, citing gross misconduct and unethical practices. He paused, his gaze fixed on the imposing marble facade of the bank, its name etched in gold above the entrance, a monument to a legacy he was about to reclaim, and informed them that Evan Miller, an intern, will be offered an executive position, Assistant Vice President of Agricultural Lending, effective immediately. His integrity, unlike others, is intact. He ended the call, the click final, definitive, severing the cord between the past and the inevitable future. The ache in his cheek pulsed, but it was no longer just pain. It was a catalyst, a living, breathing trigger for the long-awaited retribution. The quiet farmer had just declared war. Inside the bank, oblivious to the seismic shift he had just unleashed, Richard Hale was basking in the afterglow of his self-proclaimed triumph. He strode back into his office, a smirk of satisfaction plastered across his face, his chest puffed out like a preening pigeon. Peterson, the obsequious loan officer, looked at him with a mix of awe and trepidation, a loyal lackey. "That's how you deal with trash, Peterson," Hale declared, straightening his tie with an arrogant flourish, his voice loud enough for several nearby employees to hear, a public pronouncement of his supposed power. "You show them who's in charge. You put them back in their place. These farm boys with their dusty boots and their pathetic sob stories, they think they can waltz in here and tell us how to run a multi-million-dollar operation. Laughable. Pathetic." He sat heavily in his plush leather chair, a king on his self-appointed throne, his eyes gleaming with malicious pleasure. His eyes scanned the lobby, catching sight of Evan, the intern, still standing near the counter, a silent, disapproving witness, his face pale, his eyes still wide with shock and quiet condemnation. Hale's victorious smirk twisted into a snarl. He pointed a finger at him, sharp and accusatory. "You," he barked. "Evan, come here." Evan flinched, then slowly, reluctantly walked towards Hale's office, his steps hesitant, like a lamb approaching a wolf's den. The air around him was thick with dread. "I saw you offering water to that insolent peasant," Hale snarled, his voice low but venomous, a hissed accusation. "And I heard you whispering your little subversive philosophies. You think I didn't notice your little moral posturing, your soft-hearted sentimentality. In this bank, Evan, you fall in line or you fall out. We don't tolerate bleeding hearts. We don't tolerate insubordination. We value ruthlessness, efficiency, and unwavering loyalty to profit. Your kind of weakness is a liability." Hale leaned forward, his eyes burning with a cold, terrifying fury, a predator scenting weakness. "You're fired, Evan. Clear out your desk. Effective immediately. Consider it a lesson in the harsh realities of the corporate world." Evan's jaw dropped, his face paling further. "But I didn't do anything wrong, sir. I just offered him water. It was a simple act of decency." "Wrong is questioning my authority," Hale roared, slamming his hand on the desk, the sound cracking like a whip. "Wrong is sympathizing with the kind of people who drag this economy down, who stand in the way of progress. Get out, and let this be a lesson to all of you," he shouted, sweeping his gaze across the other startled employees who quickly averted their eyes, fearing his wrath. "Farm boys don't own banks. They're just collateral. Men like me do. Men with vision, men with power." His words, steeped in arrogance and contempt, resonated through the lobby, chilling the very air, leaving a lingering taste of fear and injustice. Audience hatred peaked, a silent, simmering rage building against the man who represented everything wrong with power unchecked, with humanity forsaken for profit. The night passed, long and heavy, for many in the small farming community surrounding the town. For Caleb, it was a night of quiet reflection, of drawing up battle plans, of meticulously charting the course of his counterattack. He spent hours at his antique desk, a relic from his great-grandfather, a cup of strong, black coffee steaming beside him, its bitter aroma mingling with the scent of old paper and dust. He reviewed financial statements, digging through old, yellowed records of the bank's founding, unearthing the true vision that had been buried under layers of greed. He had known the rot was there, a cancerous growth slowly consuming the institution he had nurtured from afar, a silent blight on his family's legacy. But the slap, that singular act of raw, unadulterated contempt, had stripped away any lingering hope for a gradual, subtle course correction, any notion of reasoned diplomacy. Now it was war. A quiet, calculated war waged by a man who understood the delicate balance of a thriving ecosystem, the way a single blight could wipe out an entire crop, the way unchecked greed could destroy a community. He wasn't just a silent owner anymore. He was a silent storm, meticulously gathering its destructive power, about to break with an unstoppable force. This bank, his bank, was blighted, and he was the surgeon come to cut out the cancer. He thought of the Millers, their faces etched with despair. 3 generations, 100 years their family had tilled that soil, bled for it, nourished it. His great-grandfather, Josiah Rowan, had started the bank precisely for families like the Millers. Josiah, a farmer himself, had seen how banks in the distant cities exploited rural communities, how a single bad harvest or a sudden drought could wipe out decades of honest labor. He had envisioned a different kind of bank, a cooperative, a partnership. Farmers would invest, farmers would advise, and the bank would lend based not just on collateral, but on character, on legacy, on the unspoken promise of the land itself. Caleb remembered stories his grandfather used to tell, hushed tales by the firelight, of Josiah selling off a portion of his own fertile acreage to fund the initial capital, of traveling county by county, convincing wary farmers that this bank was theirs asterisk, a shield against the unpredictable cruelty of markets. The Rowan family had poured their sweat, their vision, their very identity into it. Caleb, though a formidable businessman in his own right, had chosen to live the simple life of a farmer, to stay connected to the land, to keep his fingers in the soil, even as his mind managed a vast, diversified holding company. It was his anchor, his reminder of true wealth. The bank had always been his quiet responsibility, a sleeping giant he rarely needed to rouse. Until now. He pulled out old, leather-bound ledgers, their pages brittle with age, filled with the elegant, looping script of Josiah Rowan. He saw the names of families, generation after generation, receiving fair loans, weathering storms with the bank's support. He saw the philosophy enshrined in its charter, to foster the prosperity of the agricultural community, for their success is our success. This was not just a business for Caleb, it was a sacred trust, a legacy intertwined with the very dirt beneath his nails. Hale's actions were not just financial impropriety, they were a desecration. He felt the weight of his ancestors on his shoulders, a powerful, guiding presence. They had built this with foresight and love. He would not let it be torn down by arrogance and greed. His silence had been misinterpreted as weakness for too long. The universe, in its cruel wisdom, had allowed him to be humiliated, to be publicly reduced, precisely so he would be forced to reveal the depth of his resolve, the breadth of his power, not just as a financial entity, but as the guardian of a sacred trust. He was not just Caleb Rowan, the farmer. He was Caleb Rowan, the inheritor, the protector. And now he was the avenger. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, a biting wind whipping through the skeletal trees, carrying the scent of impending change. At precisely 8 o'clock, a procession of sleek black SUVs, polished to a mirror sheen, pulled up in front of the Rowan Agricultural Bank. They were like silent, predatory beasts, arriving with an air of undeniable authority that commanded attention even from passers-by, their dark, reflective surfaces mirroring the stark, imposing facade of the bank itself. From the first vehicle emerged the stoic, impeccably dressed figures of the board of directors, their faces set in grave lines, their expressions unreadable, yet radiating an aura of grim determination. Behind them, a phalanx of lawyers and auditors, their briefcases clutched tight, emerged from the subsequent SUVs, their expressions as unreadable as stone, their movements precise and coordinated. Their formidable presence alone signaled an event of profound significance, a seismic tremor in the corporate landscape, a disruption that would ripple far beyond the polished walls of the bank. Then, from the lead SUV, a figure stepped out deliberately, almost ceremonially. It was Caleb Rowan. He wore the same worn denim, the same sturdy boots, the same simple, unadorned work shirt from the day before. He was dressed not for a boardroom battle, but for a day in the fields, a silent testament to his unwavering identity. The only difference was the subtle, almost imperceptible shift in his bearing. He carried himself with quiet, unshakable authority, a silent gravitas that had been hidden beneath the humble facade of a dirt farmer, carefully concealed until the moment of truth. His eyes, though still holding the quiet wisdom of the land, now held an unyielding resolve, like polished steel, reflecting the cold light of justice. He didn't look back at the expensive vehicles or the entourage that followed him like a silent army. He simply walked with slow, deliberate steps towards the bank's imposing entrance, a man of purpose walking into his destiny. Inside the bank, the morning hum was muted, strained. Employees, still reeling from the previous day's events and Evan's abrupt, cruel dismissal, worked with a nervous energy, their glances furtive, their movements subdued. Richard Hale, however, was in his office, exuding a renewed aura of self-importance, oblivious to the storm gathering outside. He was already dictating new, even harsher loan policies to Peterson, his voice resonating with a triumphant swagger. He had won. He had reasserted his dominance. The peasant was gone, the intern dismissed, and his vision of ruthless profit was firmly entrenched. He was king. The heavy front doors swung open with a soft, resonant thud, admitting the formidable procession. Hale, alerted by the sudden, collective hush that swept through the lobby, looked up from his desk, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. What was this grandstanding? Some kind of surprise audit designed to annoy him. He watched, a growing, cold unease coiling in his gut, as the board chairman, a formidable woman named Eleanor Vance, her silver hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun, led the group directly into the lobby. She moved with purpose, her gaze sweeping over the startled, apprehensive employees before landing, with laser-like precision on Hale. "Richard, a word, please." Eleanor's voice was calm, utterly composed, but it held an undeniable edge of command, a razor-sharp authority that cut through the manufactured quiet of the bank. Hale, regaining his composure with a practiced, superficial ease, rose and plastered on a cordial if slightly wary smile. "Eleanor, what a surprise! To what do we owe this impressive delegation this morning?" He gestured vaguely at the phalanx of lawyers and auditors, trying to project an air of confident inquiry, masking the growing tremor of unease he felt. Eleanor didn't bother with pleasantries. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, narrowed as she simply gestured towards Caleb, who stood slightly behind her, a silent observer, his presence radiating an almost gravitational pull. Her voice, clear and resonant, cut through the tense, anticipatory silence, each word a stone dropping into a still pond. "Gentlemen, ladies," she announced, her gaze sweeping across the stunned employees and then settling firmly, almost judgmentally, on Hale. "I believe you are all acquainted with Mr. Rowan." She paused, a deliberate, pregnant silence, letting the name hang in the air, allowing its full weight to settle upon the room. Hale's practiced smile faltered, a crack appearing in his facade. Rowan. He knew the name, of course, the founder's family, but they were long gone, irrelevant figureheads at best. But this farm boy asterisk. The blood began to drain from his face, slowly, chillingly. Then, Alina delivered the final, crushing blow, her voice softening slightly, a hint of reverence in her tone as she completed the introduction, pulling back the veil from a hidden truth. This is Mr. Caleb Rowan, the majority owner of Rowan Agricultural Bank. The words hit Richard Hale like a physical punch, a violent shockwave to his meticulously crafted reality. His entire world, built on lies and assumed power, fractured and then collapsed into a pile of shattered glass, each shard reflecting a distorted image of his own downfall. The blood drained from his face entirely, leaving it ashen, ghostly, a stark white canvas of pure terror. His jaw went slack, his tongue suddenly thick and useless. The confident swagger he had worn like a second skin evaporated, replaced by a look of abject terror and dawning, horrifying comprehension. He stared at Caleb, the dirt-poor farm boy, the man he had slapped, the man he had ridiculed, the man he had dismissed as trash, as utterly beneath him. Majority owner asterisk. The silent, unyielding gaze of Caleb Rowan, the man with mud on his boots, the man whose face still bore the fading mark of Hale's arrogance, now held all the power. And Hale, for the first time in his life, felt utterly, completely powerless, reduced to nothing. The air crackled with the sheer, undeniable force of the revelation, a storm breaking over the unsuspecting. His reign was over, shattered in a single, unvarnished truth. The public confrontation that followed was swift, devastating, and entirely without ceremony, a public execution of a corporate kingpin. Hale stood before the assembled board, the phalanx of lawyers, the watchful auditors, and the entire visibly shaken staff, a pathetic figure stripped bare of his false authority. His expensive suit, moments ago a symbol of his power, suddenly looked like a borrowed costume, ill-fitting and absurd, mocking his fall from grace. Caleb stood opposite him, still in his worn denim, his presence quiet but immense, radiating an authority that emanated not from a title, but from an unshakable inner core, a profound connection to the very foundations of the institution. He was the land given human form, solid and unyielding. Alina Vance, the board chairman, a woman whose calm demeanor belied a formidable intellect and an unwavering moral compass, began by listing Hale's transgressions. Her voice was cold, dispassionate, each word a hammer blow against Hale's crumbling facade, chipping away at his reputation, piece by agonizing piece. She meticulously detailed the numerous complaints from desperate farmers, the predatory loan practices that choked livelihoods, the reckless pursuit of profit over people, the egregious mismanagement that bordered on outright fraud, draining the bank's reserves and betraying its mission. And finally, she recounted the physical assault on a client, a shocking breach of professional conduct and basic human decency. Hale tried to interrupt, to bluster, to deny, his voice weak, reedy, quickly silenced by a sharp, cutting glance from Alina, a silent warning that further resistance was futile. His world was shrinking, his options disappearing like dust in the wind. Then Caleb spoke. His voice was soft, barely above a whisper, yet it resonated through the silent lobby with an undeniable power, a quiet storm finally breaking, its force all the more terrifying for its restraint. "Richard," Caleb began, his eyes fixed on Hale, devoid of malice, yet brimming with profound, crushing disappointment, the weight of a betrayed legacy. "You slapped me yesterday because you thought I was weak. You thought I was a nobody, a relic from a past you despised, irrelevant in your shiny new world. You thought you could humiliate me, silence me, and assert your dominance over me, and over everyone like me, everyone who works the land, everyone who values integrity over avarice. You mistook quiet for weakness, humility for poverty, and patience for ignorance. You fundamentally misunderstood the source of true power. Hale swallowed hard, his eyes wide, flickering with a desperate fear he'd never known, a terror that gnawed at his gut. He wanted to look away, to run, to disappear. But Caleb's gaze, unblinking and relentless, held him captive, forcing him to confront the mirror of his own destruction. "I am not weak, Richard," Caleb continued, his voice gaining a quiet intensity, a slow, deliberate burn. "And I am certainly not a nobody. I am Caleb Rowan. This bank, the Rowan Agricultural Bank, was founded by my great-grandfather, built on land he tilled with his own hands, with a vision far grander than your spreadsheets could ever encompass. It was meant to be a lifeline, a partner to the community, a bastion of stability, not a predator. It was built for people who understand that true wealth is in the soil, in the integrity of a handshake, in the strength of a community that rises and falls together, not just in ephemeral numbers on a spreadsheet, not in hollow, fleeting profits." He paused, letting his words sink in, each one a nail in Hale's elaborately constructed coffin, sealing his fate. The silence in the room was absolute, punctuated only by Hale's ragged breathing. "You fired Evan yesterday for showing a moment of kindness, for upholding the very principles this bank was founded upon, the principles you so readily discarded. You told him that farm boys don't own banks, that men like you do, men of vision and growth." Caleb's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible, knowing smile, a subtle gesture of ultimate victory. "You were wrong, Richard. Terribly, profoundly wrong. The land always remembers its true owners, and the bank will remember its true purpose." He turned to a leaner Vance, a silent signal passing between them, a shared understanding of justice served. Aliner, with practiced efficiency, produced a stack of legal papers, their crisp edges a stark contrast to Hale's crumpled dignity. "Richard Hale," she stated, her voice formal, echoing with official pronouncement. "Effective immediately, your employment with Rowan Agricultural Bank is terminated for gross misconduct, financial impropriety, and an utter disregard for the foundational principles of this institution. You will be escorted from the premises without delay. Furthermore, all your assets and accounts within the bank are frozen pending a full, thorough investigation into the extent of your malfeasance. There will be no golden parachute, no quiet exit, only the full weight of the law." Hale gasped, a strangled, guttural sound like an animal caught in a trap. You can't. I've been here for years. I built this department. I brought in millions in profit. This is an outrage." His voice was cracking, his carefully cultivated facade crumbling into desperate pleas. Caleb stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Hale's, a quiet, inexorable force. "You destroyed this department, Richard. You destroyed trust, the most precious commodity of all. You sowed discord and fear. You forgot what this bank was and who it was for. You mistook the fleeting shimmer of profit for the enduring glow of purpose." His voice was low, final, an unassailable judgment. "I fired you because you were wrong. About me, about this bank, and about the people you so readily dismissed as mere dirt people. The land has a longer memory than you realize, Richard. And now it demands its due." 2 security guards, the very same ones who had dragged Caleb out the previous day, now moved in to escort a stunned, defeated Richard Hale out of the bank. He tried to resist, to argue, but his voice was broken, his bluster gone, reduced to pathetic whimpers. He was led away, a whimpering, broken man, his tailored suit now seeming to mock his fall from grace, a cruel, ironic jest. As he passed Caleb, their eyes met one last time. In Hale's, there was no anger left, only a profound, chilling emptiness, the absolute ruin of a man whose world, built on sand, had finally imploded, leaving nothing but dust and echoes. He was adrift, unmoored from the false sense of power that had defined his miserable existence. Caleb turned back to the remaining staff, his gaze softening, yet still holding the weight of his resolve. His eyes sought out Evan, the young intern who stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief, then with a dawning, radiant hope like a seed breaking ground. "Evan," Caleb said, his voice clear, carrying across the silent lobby. "Please come forward." Evan, trembling slightly, approached, his hope fragile yet persistent. "Yesterday, you showed kindness when no one else would," Caleb continued, a gentle, genuine smile touching his lips, softening the hard lines etched by the past day's events. "You reminded me of what this bank should be, of the heart it lost. For that, and for your integrity, for the quiet courage you displayed, you are promoted to Assistant Vice President of Agricultural Lending, effective immediately. You will work directly with me to restore the original vision of this bank, to rebuild trust with our farmers, to heal the wounds that have festered. You represent the future of this institution." Evan's eyes welled up, tears silently tracing paths down his cheeks, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and overwhelming shock. He simply nodded, unable to speak, his heart too full for words. The quiet rebellion had found its voice and its reward. Caleb then addressed the rest of the staff, his gaze sweeping over them, commanding attention without force. "We will be instituting immediate and comprehensive changes. All loan policies will be reviewed, revised, and restored to reflect our founding mission, to serve the agricultural community with fairness, understanding, and genuine partnership. There will be no more predatory practices, no more dismissive attitudes. This bank will once again be a pillar of support, a warm, welcoming hub where farmers are treated with the respect and dignity they deserve, a place where their legacy is honored, not exploited." His words were not a threat, but a promise, a beacon of hope in a world too often shrouded in cynicism. Over the next few months, the changes swept through Rowan Agricultural Bank like a cleansing wind, revitalizing the stagnant air, blowing away the dust of corruption. Caleb, though still maintaining a quiet presence, took a more active, guiding role, not as a tyrant, but as a shepherd leading his flock back to fertile ground. He personally met with every farmer whose loan had been unfairly rejected, whose land had been at risk, whose trust had been shattered. He didn't just offer solutions. He offered genuine understanding, a renewed handshake. He implemented new programs for drought relief, for sustainable farming initiatives that preserved the delicate balance of the ecosystem, for younger generations looking to inherit and modernize their family farms, breathing new life into old traditions. Evan, under Caleb's mentorship, blossomed into a capable and empathetic leader, his passion for the community now fully realized, his quiet integrity shaping the bank's new direction. He learned not just finance but stewardship. The land, which had seemed to hold its breath under Hale's oppressive rule, began to breathe again, exhaling new life. Farmers found renewed hope, their fields once more bursting with the promise of a bountiful harvest, their anxieties replaced by a quiet confidence. The bank, once a cold, sterile monument to greed, became a warm, welcoming hub of community, its marble floors no longer reflecting cold ambition, but the quiet strength of partnership, the warm glow of restored trust. Caleb, the silent owner, had spoken, not with shouts, but with actions that resonated deep into the heart of the land and its people, healing old wounds and forging new bonds. He remained a man of few words, his hands still calloused, his boots still dusty, but his presence now carried the immense weight of justice, of an honored legacy, and of a power that had always been there, quietly waiting beneath the surface, for the opportune moment to reveal itself. He was the quiet master of a system he had quietly built, a system now restored to its righteous purpose. He often walked his own fields in the early morning, the air fresh and cool against his skin, the earth soft and yielding beneath his boots. The sun, a warm, golden orb, painted the sky with hues of amber and rose, a silent promise of another day's growth. He thought of the bank, of the farmers, of the relentless, beautiful cycle of growth and harvest. He thought of Hale, a fleeting shadow, already fading into the forgotten past, a cautionary tale whispered on the wind. The land, he knew, held all the answers. It remembers who respects it. It remembers the hands that work it, the sweat that nurtures it, the storms it weathers, and the care that sustains it through the leanest years. It holds the echoes of generations, a living testament to endurance, a silent, powerful observer. Power doesn't shout. It doesn't need grand gestures or boastful declarations to make its presence known. It resides in the quiet strength of conviction, in the deep, unwavering roots of purpose, in the profound, unshakable belief in what is right. It is patient. It waits. And when the time is right, when the scales of justice tip too far, it reveals itself, not with a roar, but with a profound, undeniable truth that reshapes worlds, that reclaims legacies, that rights wrongs. It waits for the moment of deepest indignity, the greatest injustice, to remind everyone that some forces, like the land itself, cannot be bought, cannot be silenced, and certainly cannot be defeated. They are simply waiting for their moment to bloom. And so, their destiny was forged anew, a legacy built from the ashes of the old, stronger and more resilient than ever before. Their story now belongs to time, a testament to endurance, but its profound power only grows if shared, if its lessons are carried forward. True authority isn't found in a title or a tailored suit, but in the quiet strength of character and an unwavering commitment to principle, to the very earth beneath our feet. But as one man breaks the chains of a corrupt system, another finds himself trapped by them, a new struggle always brewing just beyond the horizon. How many untold stories of silent power and hidden resilience wait beneath the surface of our everyday lives, yearning to be discovered, to reshape the world with their quiet truth. If this journey marked your soul, if the whispers of the land resonated with your spirit, know that the greatest narratives are those that refuse to die in silence, echoing through eternity.